James, how is the update? Because I saw your really cool video. I actually really like it. I'm going to translate it into Polish and try to post it. When you put in like a really good update on
Mhm.
the WHO has missed the deadline.
Almost everybody appears to be confused. And so, at the very least, there are, multiple things going on, and everybody all seems to get them mixed up. So, for what you're talking about very specifically, it has to do with amendments that are being considered or would like to be considered for the May 27 to June 1st World Health Assembly. And there's just a little problem with those. They very absolutely, totally know that they missed their deadline. Their
Yeah,
deadline was yesterday. We're recording this on Sunday, January 28th. And 4 months in advance of their meeting, according to Article 55 in the International Health Regulations, says that they have to share or communicate a package of amendments to all of the nations. The Director General has to do that with all the nations. And there's no evidence that they've done that. There's no evidence that they had any intention of doing that. There's plenty of evidence that they knew they weren't going to be able to do it because the nations have not come to an agreement. And so they're going to try to cheat.
yeah,
And that's up to us to make sure that each nation's representative holds themselves and holds the World Health Assembly to account. I had a wonderful conversation with Gentleman Bruce Party in um, Canada, and there's clarity that I think people need to have. There's the World Health Organization, which is the bureaucracy, right? The executive branch, if you will, um, the deep state part of the World Health Organization. But they are supposed to be governed by uh, the member nations. They always keep saying, oh, this is a member nation led process. Well, the governing body of the World Health Organization is the World Health Assembly, which is the nations, 194 sovereign nations that are in charge collectively. And if they all decide, to ignore the rules, then, we live in an anarchy riddled world.
yeah,
There needs to be somebody who has the cojones to stand up for the rule of law and get them to follow their own darn rules. They like to, just ignore rules and hold us, to account to made up rules that we're not supposed to be forced to do things that are against our rights and freedoms. But Article 55 is brutally crystal clear. And back in October, and quite frankly, back in um, February of last year, I went and dug up an older one. Uh, they very clearly said, "Oh yeah, January is the deadline," but they've missed it, and
yeah.
and
But
so
the
we
video, the video, sorry, that you put out, the really cool video, this one had little bits from the December meeting, right? Am I correct, or was that October meeting?
well, it depends which video you may have seen. The one that
The
I'm
six
referring
minutes
to,
one.
yeah, I think you might have seen a different one. There's a lot of stuff that I've been putting out. The latest video talking about this had a clip from their meetings back in February and in October, and they uh, they know very well that they've missed their deadline. They would love to keep that quiet. They would love to have nobody, pay any attention to it. But, in essence, in this regard, they have failed. And it is up to, we the people to hold each of our nation's representatives accountable for holding themselves accountable to follow their own rules. And, the World Health Assembly is an assembly of representatives of sovereign nations. And so each nation um, participates in this assembly, and they've agreed amongst themselves to certain rules. One of them being the International Health Regulations. Part of that is Article 55, and they blew it. They just
Mm.
totally blew it. And it should be cause for, um, at the very least, an awareness around the world that they are not invincible, they are not infallible, they are not a um, unified force. You know, we, the people, quite frankly, are probably more unified than they are. They're having difficulty reaching agreement. And, partly
My que
because they're fighting
Yeah.
over money. Yeah, they're fighting over money.
Yeah, it looks like they're fighting over money and the power and who's going to be in charge of all the contracts and things. I've seen that. But then the question remains, so they are still meeting beginning of February, which is pretty much around the corner.
Mhm.
I've seen that they've put out two documents. I don't know if you've had a look at them, that they
Yep.
are still going to be proceeding with the stuff. Um, so from that perspective, do you think that when they meet in February, they will be pretending like nothing happened? But also at the same
Probably
time,
so.
what is our solution to do? Do you think that there is something that we now all can do as countries individually? Because we know they missed the deadline. Technically, they should put this information out. My only worry looking at the way they do these things is that they've sent it to our representatives, but
Mhm.
kind of forgot to actually make this information public. Now, of course, I know they probably didn't, but just in case, that's a possibility that they might try to play. Again, that would then breach the whole process because they've been saying that this is all transparent and people are advised and aware of what they're doing. So what
Mhm.
do you think about the February meeting and then what we can do with the information that we know they missed the deadline?
To be clear, they've set up meetings from February 5th to the 9th. So next week, not this coming week, but the week after. And then in April as well. And in the video that I recently put out this morning, they have stated very clearly, or I should say, Stephen Solomon, their lawyer, has stated very clearly that if they miss their deadline, which they apparently clearly have, they can give a progress report in May, and they can continue meeting, but they're shooting for 2025. Anything that they consider at the May 2024 meeting has to be seen as null and void. They are violating Article 55. By all means, they can keep trying to negotiate, but they don't get to be like Nancy Pelosi, where, with Obamacare, the 1,000-page bill rolled in, and they go, oh, well, let's vote on it. Don't worry about it. You can vote on it and then read it afterwards. That is not acceptable. The documents that you mentioned, they have their proposed agenda for their February meeting. I reported on that last week sometime. Uh, Almost everything is still being negotiated. I mean, they haven't even they even left, and I find this very amusing. They left the most fundamental questions for last. The first four articles, which are definition of terms and the scope of the document, and the fundamental principles of the document and how it's implemented. They've left all of that for last. They don't even know what the terminology is that they're using. They haven't defined, what a vaccine is or what a pandemic is or, any of these things. Uh, it's quite frankly a mess. And the one thing that I feel nobody has really grasped or paid attention to is this entire negotiating process is really outside of their authority. And let me try to explain that. That's going to take a minute or two or more. I think the entire thing is illegitimate. So, my personal perspective, is that the WHO is maybe an advisory body, and the international health regulations were never properly ratified, to my knowledge, by any nation in the world. They got together when everybody was watching the moonshot, and in Boston on July 25th, 1969, they signed an agreement which never went back for approval by any of the nations. It was essentially just, well, we'll keep it quiet for 9 months, and if nobody disagrees, we'll all just assume that everyone's good with it. And it came into effect on the first day of January in 1971. I challenge anybody around the world, go look in your national public records and see if your parliament or Congress or Senate or whatever body ever properly ratified the international health regulations. I don't believe it happened everywhere or anywhere. So the whole darn thing is illegitimate. But as part of the WHO Constitution, it says that they can craft, or the World Health Assembly can craft regulations for a handful of issues. Now, one of those issues are the definition of terms. They're supposed to have a whole, list, and they do in Article 1, but they've never defined pandemic, they've never defined vaccine, they've never defined safe and effective. So, there's a lot of words that are being used that don't have a definition. They have the authority, according to Article 21 in their Constitution, to set standards for diagnostic testing. Well, anybody who knows, what's going on with the PCR realizes that it's not a test, it's a laboratory process, and it's fraudulently been used as a test to diagnose disease. They have the authority to set standards for cause of death, on someone's death certificate. And over the last 4 years, and still, did people die from or with COVID? Never been defined. They have the authority to set standards for the purity of pharmaceutical and biological products, which they have not done. And anyone who's been paying attention to all the garbage that has been found in the vials, standards would have been nice, right? And last but not least, they have the authority to set standards for advertising and labeling. And labeling includes those blank inserts that were supposed to give people all the information about the potential risks so that they can make an informed decision to decide whether or not to allow, some unknown substances to be injected into their body. For 76 years, the World Health Assembly has failed to ever set regulations for any of the things I just mentioned. They're not even remotely talking about any of that stuff, which is really what people are, upset about. Those are things that, had they done their job at any point in the last 76 years, maybe some of the things wouldn't have been so bad over the last 4 years. They have no intention of doing any of that, because all of that would put them in direct conflict with their masters, which I call the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. They are just salespeople pushing for a build out with tens of billions of dollars so that they can build laboratories and testing facilities and genomic sequencing labs. We need, according to them, more Wuhan institutes of virology all over the world so that they can go searching for pathogens, bring them in, and do genetic work on them to make pandemic related products that would then be equitably distributed, which is what they're really negotiating. They're not talking about health. They're crafting a business deal to see where the money is supposed to flow so that they can manufacture more biological weapons to inject into more unsuspecting people, quite frankly, in nations that are mostly filled with Black or brown people. And it's their own people, their own representatives, who are arguing for the intellectual property and the manufacturing know-how and the investment capital. It's a, global north, global south. The wealthy nations with all the pharmaceutical companies have the know-how to make the biological weapons and profit from them. And that didn't sit very well. They were unhappy that they did not get a piece of the pie during COVID. And that's what these negotiations are all about. Well, because they're all greedy on both sides, one group doesn't want to give and the other one doesn't want to stop, demanding. They've reached a bit of an impasse and they missed their deadline. And Tedros said it so clearly at their briefing. He said, well, if nations don't give a little bit, then nobody's going to get, right? And
Right.
so that summed it up perfectly. It's like, this is a business deal. They all really want it to happen. They want that deal to go through so that tens of billions of dollars can funnel into their, corrupt operation. Um, but they're having an internal squabble over who gets what piece of the pie to our benefit. So they have failed. We need to understand that what they're doing needs to fail. They're trying to make it sound like, oh, we're trying to prevent the next pandemic. Hell no. They're trying to generate the next one by looking for pathogens, bringing them into the lab so that they can fearmonger, people again and again and again. So thanks for letting me rant.
No, it's okay.
This
Yeah, but
was
that's good because it's it helps people to kind of understand. We still have this issue where people don't very often make a mistake, but well, less and less, but we still have people who don't understand that there's two separate things going. The one that we're today talking about is the international health regulations, which seems from what you're saying, and we've kind of all look at, and we'll see in February, beginning of Feb, where they are at. But I'm expecting that they will say, okay, well, it has to be done in 2025. What do you think about the treaty, though? Do you think that this situation with treaty is different or the same?
well, thanks for mentioning because they are two separate processes. They do have two separate timelines and separate rules and all that sort of stuff. So just to recap, the proposed amendments to the international health regulations, they did give us 197 pages with 300 amendments well over a year ago. They were originally submitted September 30th, 2022. And we've seen those, but they've been secretly negotiating them for well over a year. And their deadline to, put their cards on the table has passed. So they're still trying to negotiate that in secret and drop it on the table. But the rule is they have to do that 4 months in advance, and they missed their window. So they're going to have to shoot legally. They're going to cheat, and we have to hold them to account. But they're going to shoot for 2025. The other negotiations, which have had 5 or 6 different names and different versions, and they have been negotiating that for a couple of years now, and it's gone through a series of revisions. And this draft and the other draft has many, many different names. That does not have that same 4 month in advance of the May meeting requirement. It's always been known that they're going to try to negotiate that right up to the last minute because it's a different scenario. It would then have to be voted on not just a majority, but a 2/3 majority. And so there's a group of 72 nations, the 47 nations in the African region of the WHO, and there's a group that refers to themselves as the Group for Equity, all combined, and you take away a couple of redundant nations that are in both. There's about 72 nations, which is more than 1/3 of 194 nations. So that block of nations has enough solidarity that if they don't get their way, then if they say no, it's not going to happen. They're not going to get 2/3 majority. And so they are very unhappy that the text that they have been proposing has been ignored. Back in April, they were not happy. And after their April meeting, it was said, well, okay, all of the nations should submit their text that they want to add into the negotiations. And that was all put together in a 208-page compilation text, what all the nations said they wanted. What happened in June after that was all put together was a 43-page summary was presented known as the Bureau's text, the Bureau being 6 people, one from each nation, I'm sorry, one from each region, that is kind of running the negotiations. Well, the nation spent the whole summer very unhappy that what they wanted was not being reflected in the text. So they sent them back to the drawing board. And just think about the numbers. They've got 208 pages that have been submitted. They got a 43-page document. They said, go back to the drawing board, give us another one. And it got smaller. It went down to 30 pages. And now they're really unhappy. And so they sent them back to the drawing board again. So as we speak right now, really, there is no pandemic agreement because it's being rewritten. And at the end of February, the last 2 weeks of February and a couple of weeks in March are the only negotiation time that they have on their schedule. We don't really know what that document currently is because it's being rewritten. It probably, I wouldn't doubt it, it could get bigger or smaller. Whatever the details are in that document are important, but what's really important is what type of agreement it is. And in chapter 3 of the last version, it's a framework convention, which is no surprise because that's what they said they wanted 2 years ago when this all came out of the gate. And so a framework convention, in my personal opinion, is insane. What it would do is they could agree to a blank piece of paper and say, all right, well, we're all agreed. We'll have set up a new bureaucracy, the Conference of the Parties. They'll meet on a yearly basis, and whatever they decide, that'll be fine. And nothing that the people or anybody could say about it. And so this is very much, it's the same type of agreement that was made in 1992 through the United Nations, and all of the nations did sign on to the Framework Convention for Climate Change. And so if you think that's working out great, if you think that every year when they get together for the Conference of the Parties, COP28 last December, and they make decisions over our lives that the nations agreed to back in 1992, that, well, whatever they do on a yearly basis is going to be just fine. That's crazy. There's no democratic representative, structure in that at all. Our national leaders, our heads of state, appoint delegates to go, and it's essentially, a leadership council of oligarchs. All of the social groups, the organizations, the foundations, the corporations, they send delegates, and we, the people, have no say in what's going on. And to set up something like that, to divvy up tens of billions of dollars for looking for new pathogens and bringing them into more Wuhan um, and, virology labs, Institute of Virology labs, that is not a solution to improve the health of the world. That is a solution to build out the industry that is enormously profitable because it's running on fear of some unknown pathogen. Disease acts. If you can keep people afraid and keep jabbing them up to, not improve their health, but damage their health, they found a cash cow. If people are afraid and they beg their government to print money and go into debt to give them, these new mRNA genetic altering therapies, they think that they have found, the holy grail of making money for harming people. And the answer's got to be no. Whatever the details are in that agreement, to agree to another framework convention for anything is, in my view, just absolutely absurd.
I think the issue we're also looking at, so I mean, for anybody who never kind of is new to the subject, so we've got the international health regulations, which it looks like, hopefully, if they do not cheat, we have an extra year to kind of make people more aware, right? But I guess you share my opinion. It's unlikely that we will have that extra time with the treaty, right? Or whatever they want to call it, convention or accord. I mean, they went through so many different names. We ourselves are like losing track. But again, it's quite likely this one will not be the one that will be put off. They will try to push this as much as I can. Do you agree on that one?
Well, I'm an optimist, and so I wouldn't be doing this if I thought any of it was going to be allowed to succeed. The difficulty that they have with the agreement, okay, really, they're shooting for a framework convention. Number one, they have to get a two-thirds majority.
Mm-hmm.
And after they get the two-thirds majority, then each nation officially should have to ratify it by whatever process that nation would go through. In the U.S., it is supposed to be adopted by the Senate or confirmed by the Senate. Now, our lovely and wonderful Senate back in 1992 did confirm with the 2/3 majority the Framework Convention for Climate Change.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people at the time were bamboozled, into thinking that that was a good idea. I think that it's going to be damn near impossible for them to get anything like that. Now, something like the Paris Accords, where it's only signed by Obama, unsigned by Trump, signed by Biden, who knows what the next president may or may not do. Any kind of an agreement that is just, signed by our president can come and go with the wind. People just need to understand what this is. This is a business deal. It's a trade dispute. The reason these negotiations are happening is many nations around the world back in December of 2021 were unhappy that Canada and the European Union and Israel and the UK and the United States, Australia, New Zealand bought up, 10 jabs per person, and the relatively poorer nations didn't get any jabs, on a relative basis. They haven't yet allowed themselves to, awaken to just how lucky they were that the wealthier nations bought up most of the production run of all of these various mRNA vaccines. And they're arguing for equitable access to pandemic related products. What? They want more remdesivir. They want more ventilators and midazolam. They want more mRNA jabs. They're out of their freaking minds unless you look at it and you go, oh, wait a minute. This isn't about health. This is about money and control. From that perspective, it's evil. It's not insane, it's evil. They want investment into the products that harm people's health but are unbelievably profitable. And so until people awaken to the reality that this is all about money, this is a trade dispute that really shouldn't even be being handled by the World Health Organization. They're essentially just, a marketing team for the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes, because I think the main picture that people are very often missing that kind of heard about these, we get people who get very excited over it, and they all go about yes, and the WHO, and and they want to destroy us. They are missing the key, at least for me, is that every single time they meet, the WHO keeps to be saying we are only facilitators here. And we are doing this for you so that you can meet here in this wonderful room, and you all 190 whatever talk, but because I think there's +2, right, that are not a part of WHO, but also want to be a part of the whole, call it a accord, treaty, whichever. So we're only here as these facilitators. And I think what we're kind of missing is this is also a key that we can use. If they are only this salesman that is getting the house seller and the house buyer, or whichever you want to call it, then therefore, why is the salesman or the manager or the person that is facilitating gaining so much from what they're currently doing? Because if that does go through, it is this salesman stroke manager that will be in charge of telling us if there is another extreme event that has happened, right? They will be the ones who will be allocating products to different places. We will be the ones who will be giving them 10% of what we managed to produce so that it can be given, right? So it's very clever the way they done it. And I also see it as a very good business model, at some point, if you look at it. I just came here to help you three agree on how the business is going to be done. But at the end of the day, what you guys are going to do is you're going to make me the manager of your business. This is pretty much for for people who to make it more
Yep.
understandable, I guess.
Well, one of the other things that's going on at the same time is their 14th General Program of Work, GPW. Okay. And it's essentially what their 4-year plan is. If you're familiar with,
Hmm.
Soviet Russia used to have a 5-year plan and China has their 10-year plans. Well, the WHO has a 4-year plan for 2025, 26, 27, 28. And they're in the middle of an enormous fundraising push. They call it their replenishment because they get in 2022 about 84% of their income, their donate was from donations. The nations that are supposed to be the governing body of the WHO have lost control in a sense because only about 16% in 2022 of the money came from assessed payments or dues, if you want to call them that. And 84% came from donations from the nations, as well as from all kinds of foundations and corporations and so forth. And so the US was obligated to pay about 200 million, but we gave an extra 750 million on top of it in 2022. And so with all that money comes influence to guide whatever they do. So, who's pulling the strings at the WHO? Well, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. And so a lot of people want to blame this, that, or the other nation. Well, they're all trying to do it. The European Union, I'm sorry, the European Commission gave about 200 million. In the couple of years past, Germany gave hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, wait a minute. They've got a lot of pharmaceutical industry in Germany. So if you're supporting your marketing arm through the WHO, it all comes back around and improves the economy of your nation if they're pushing your solution to the health problems. If you look at what happened in Africa, they didn't make the profits from that continent. They made the profits from Europe and North and South America and elsewhere around the world. And so what you realize is that the WHO, I call it begging for billions. They're spending a couple of $1 million, and later on in 2024, they're supposed to have some very fancy events to wine and dine heads of state and board members of all these foundations. They need to extract, according to them, 7 point something $billion for their 4-year plan. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to play the way they like to play. They need to have financing for their marketing and promotion arm of the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex.
And do we know what events are they planning, or is this something that they haven't confirmed yet?
It's no specific events planned,
Okay.
and so it is scheduled according to them for the fourth quarter of 2024. But if you just take a step back and think about it, and you look at their budget, they're only getting, maybe
Hmm.
20%. They're trying to get more from the nations. Maybe 20% of their budget comes from the dues or the assessed payments that the nations pay. And even with that, if you look at that, there are nations, like I looked up Central African Republic and some of the other small nations, maybe their dues are $5,000 or $10,000 a year. Not an outrageous amount of money to be seated at the table where, multi-million-dollar contracts might come back to your nation for what, a $10,000 investment. And so what people have to realize is as long as the nations see dealing with the WHO as being profitable, if the WHO can bring that money back around and hire people and give out contracts and whatever kind of corruption may be involved, money laundering, whatever you want to call what they're doing, think about how people join country clubs to go golfing. If you have to, people pay more than that, for a membership at a country club. But if you get to meet and go on the golf course and do business deals with people, the value of that investment in your membership could potentially, pay off many, many, many times over. Bill Gates famously said, he had a 20 to 1 return on his investment, and the vice or the deputy director general, I think the term title is, said, "Oh no, that's more like 35 to 1." And so,
Hmm.
if nations and organizations and foundations and corporations put in money to their marketing team, and they get governments and groups like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, or quite frankly the U.S. Defense Department through the National Defense Authorization Act, we're pumping $1 billion a year just through our Defense Department into the World Bank Pandemic Fund. That all flows through sideways through the WHO to nations that are building out more laboratories. And so, I first got like extreme clarity on this November 2022 when the Indonesian health minister was talking to the B20, not the G20, not the government meeting, but the B20. And
Yeah.
he said,
For anybody who doesn't understand what a B20 is, this is something that normally happens a week prior to G20. This year, last year, sorry, it was happening in India. And therefore, a week prior, G20 was taking, India was the country that is the host for the G20. And that one normally happens either a week or two, something like that, prior to the G20. So it's called Business 20. So that's how they kind of brand it.
yep. And so that was at a time where the US had announced it had been spending a year working on this fund with the World Bank. It didn't get written into law until December of 2022. So, right in the middle, in November, they knew it was coming. And he said to the business leaders, the United States and the World Bank have this multi-billion-dollar fund. This is a great business opportunity. Go invest. Well, invest in what? Invest in any industry that would profit from the next pandemic, whether that's testing or laboratory equipment or personal protective equipment or vaccine, manufacture, drugs, whatever it may be. And so, when they're giving business advice saying there's a multi-billion-dollar fund to build out what is awfully close to $1 trillion industry, if they can convince governments to just throw money at people's fear, if they
Mm,
can generate the fear of COVID or disease X or Ebola or whatever they want to call it, and people don't stop their own government from handing money over to these criminals in a situation that is as corrupt as anybody could possibly imagine. Anyone in the mafia or any organized crime would recognize this as the best example of organized crime anyone could ever possibly craft under the guise of an international agreement. They want to put into law their criminal activities, and they want us to pay for our own demise. So y'all
that's it.
better wake up. Y'all better wake up real quick. They're not doing all that well because the different crime families, the different crime bosses are arguing over who gets what piece of the pie. And while they're busy arguing, we, the people, need to wake up and just simply say, no, what they're doing is really more biological warfare than it is trying to improve the health. They're diverting all that money away from things like heart disease and stroke and cancer and diabetes and, in many nations, malaria, tuberculosis, and so forth. Um, they don't care about making people healthier. They're saying that the goal of their general program of work is to implement the sustainable development goals in relationship to health. Well, I don't think you're going to improve the health of pregnant women and the health of newborn children by jabbing poison into them. And so it's this downward spiral of, well, our goal is to improve health. All of the donors want us to stick, needles into pregnant women and children. And now we wonder why everyone is getting more and more sick. Oh, we need more money to do the wrong thing over and over and over again. At some point, I do trust that the people of the world will wake up to the scam that is being run by these con artists.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, look, to kind of summing it up, because we're here like for 40 minutes now, but I think the good one is more and more people are talking about it. I've seen you on quite a few podcasts on Twitter, well, X or whatever way you want people call it now. And there is this discussion and it's going further, and we have people talking about it. We in Europe will have a general election this year, and
Hmm.
it is looking quite interesting because a lot of countries are really swaying to this more parties who are more against
Hmm.
this becoming one big global Europe. They're more into, there's discussion about Dexit, which is German exit. There's discussion about Frexit, which is the French exit. We've always had a bit of a Polish exit, which is Paul exit, but that's not going to happen for a very, very long time. But I guess Netherlands is on the same in the same boat. They're also talking about it, and if this sways and it changes and it will get to these more, I would say, difficult to call, but right wing
Hmm.
parties, it is quite likely that if we're able to not have the IHR amendments, I don't know how European countries and how European Parliament will be looking after June 2024. So
Hmm.
fingers crossed that we get more um, Parliament members that are awake and that will join the ones that are already there. But also, I think we really need to start like putting out more information. I know you've been doing it forever, and so have I, and we like get to the point where we're really tired, but we just keep plowing through it. But the more we talk about them failing with the IHR, it's great. It's a good sign that they are fighting like little girls because they want a little bit more of the pie. So that's one. And then let's just see if we can tackle what comes up with this accord, treaty, or whatever they want to call it.
It starts with information, awareness, get good information. It's kind of funny. I've had a number of people who play some clip, of Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General, saying something, bemoaning the fact that there's been this torrent of misinformation. And I generally agree. There has been a torrent of misinformation. What people are doing is presenting the missing information that they don't want you to see. And they just call that misinformation because they don't want you to know all of the things that, they're doing behind the scenes. Number one, they missed their deadline to present the final package of, in their words, package of targeted amendments to be considered at the 77th World Health Assembly in May in alignment with Article 55. What that means is 4 months in advance. Well, they've failed to provide that information. That information, that final package of amendments, is currently missing. And so we need that missing information. What happened back in 2022 when I first got involved in this, got to give them credit. The Biden administration proposed a package of 13 amendments 4 months in advance. And in that 4 months, the nations looked at it and they kicked it to the curb. They said, no, we don't want anything to do with that. And that's why Article 55 exists. Present whatever it is you want 4 months in advance. The nations get a chance to look at it. They can make a decision in May. Hey, sorry, you guys missed your deadline. See you in 2025. You do not get to have the opportunity to have anything considered at the 77th World Health Assembly in May 2024. Now, maybe by some wild stretch of the imagination at the very last second, they've done some agreement that they've submitted and shared with everybody. So one of the things that I've done, and I've encouraged other people to do, I know many people already have around the world, is to submit a freedom of information request at whatever country you may reside in and say, pardon me, the deadline was January 27th. the Director General was obligated to have submitted to each nation a communique that, here's the package that we want you to consider in May. Ask your State Department, Foreign Affairs Department, Foreign Ministry, Health Ministry, Prime Minister, did you get any such communication? Because if you didn't get it, then they have failed to achieve, what they know they had to achieve. And so I encourage everyone to, put forth that Freedom of Information request. This one's a little bit different in that normally you put in a Freedom of Information request because you want to see the documents. But in this case, if they don't have the documents or don't provide them, that is the evidence of failure. Their failure to produce the documents that we need to request means that they've lost and they can come back next year. And so I encourage people all around the world, Justina, you know me, I give my phone number all the time, 310-619-3055. Give me a phone call if you have any questions. I've had a number of people, just have some simple questions to try to get all of this clear in your mind, because I get it. It's confusing. It's meant to be confusing. Step number 1 is to become aware. Step number 2 is to become clear on the facts. And step number 3 is to spread the word. So, wherever you put this video, all people really have to do is say, look, take this video and share it with somebody else. All of the information that I've ever written is on jamesroguski.substack.com, Roguski. And I've had Polish people tell me that I mispronounced my own name. So I'm going to have some Polish folk, help me get my
your pronunciation.
My pronunciation proper. I grew up in Ohio, so I'm about as Polish as anybody in Ohio. But the point is, get the information, share the information with other people, and just point and shine some light on the truth. Because all we really have to do is show anybody this is what they're doing. They're hiding the documents. They're currently rewriting the quote unquote agreement. So nobody really knows what's in there, except they just want to create a new bureaucracy to meet year after year after year off into the future. No, the answer is no, period. And so, I wouldn't be doing this for the last 2 years if I was planning on losing. There are certainly changes that need to be made in the world, but not in the direction that they are heading. They saw huge profits from the last 4 years, and they're trying to increase that by an order of magnitude and get government, money and quite frankly, debt from our future generations to fund their criminal operation. And, we the people just have to realize that what we're dealing with is a bunch of criminals who are trying to steal not just our wealth, but use that to damage our health. And the answer just simply has to be no.
I like that. I like what you said when you said it's missing information. So I think if we kind of start explaining to people and to whoever keeps saying that we're spreading misinformation, it really isn't. They've been misinformed. We're just spreading the missing information. And I think, that's the way we need to keep going forward. So, I mean, let's see how it goes after February. I hope we can, meet again and have a discussion and see. I'm going to definitely speak to people to request that information from, and I think it's a brilliant idea. Just send a letter, whether it's to your health department. Normally it is, Ministry of Health or Foreign Affairs, and they can just tell you, yes, we got it, or we know we didn't. And then, we move on to the next part and see where it takes us. But I think it's, it is a good information. It's we a lot of fear mongering, and sometimes we also tell them what they want to do, and it's a lot of fear too on our part. In a way, that's not what we want to invoke. We want to get people mobilized to do something and to get in there and talk about the problem. But it's good to have a good news, right? So
yeah,
hopefully we'll have more of it.
There, oftentimes, two wrongs don't necessarily make a right. But in this particular case, greed on one side and their greed on the other side, and they're bickering about how to divvy up the pie, there may be no pie for them. And that would be a good thing. We need to take any money that they're talking about and actually use it to do the things that would truly improve people's health. That is not their intent. That is not their business model. They have no concern truly for what makes people healthy, as evidenced by the way it went over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. Thank you, James.
Thank
And
you.
I'm sure we'll speak in a couple of weeks to see how it goes.